Wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away. Wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today. Calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, he from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. 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 Jesus provides a rest. Wonderful story of love. For all the pure and blessed. Rest in those mansions above us. With those who've gone on before us. Singing the rapturous chorus. Wonderful story of love. 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 Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Wonderful story of love.
Turn in your Bibles to the book of James. In just a moment, we will start there. A couple of matters of housekeeping that I will mention. I did get a text from Wesley and Angel, and they were not able to be here tonight. Everybody's okay. Just Elowen, and they're putting her to bed early, so they were not able to be here. And Ken and Christine are not able to be with us because of allergies. So I wanted to mention that before I forgot. All right, James chapter 4. This was from the first day of the week of the reading last week, and the whole chapter was part of that day's reading. But we're only going to look at the first 4 verses of this chapter. I don't know if that means that we're going to get through really early tonight, and I'm going to send you home early, or if that means we're going to go for a really long time. We'll find that out in a moment. Speaking of that, I will start my timer so that I don't go too far over. All right, James chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. This chapter opens with a question. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? That seems like an easy enough question to answer, because everyone that's ever been in a quarrel or a fight will tell you that the reason this is happening is because he said this or she did that, and they're always pointing the finger at the other party. They started it. I've never in my life heard anyone in a quarrel who said, this is all my fault. It's always what someone else did, what someone else said. They're always to blame. They're always at fault. But that is not what he says. He doesn't say, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Because you treat one another poorly. He says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? The question of why there's quarreling and why that there is fighting and why we get ourselves into these situations is because our poor decision making, and that's what it is, it's me making bad decisions, is caused by my own internal unrest, my own dissatisfaction, my own discontentment, my own problems, my issues with coming to grips with my own view of self and of the world and of the people around me and purposes and plans and what is right and what is wrong. I don't think that this is intended to be an exhaustive statement that is universal in its application. I think it's a general statement, but it's generally true. Even when I am fighting because of what someone else has done or said to me, at the root of it usually is still my own insecurity and my own discontent and my own problems. And so my reaction to them is not what it ought to be. I make a poor decision, and that leads to the quarrels and the fights. We allow our personal discontentedness to affect our behavior. That's the bottom line. I guess the trope in the television shows of the 50s and 60s was the guy who came home after a bad day of work kicking the dog on his way in. But that pictures what this is talking about. My own problems that I then start projecting upon the world around me and blaming them for the issue. And there's something that we need to understand. We need to understand when this happens, when my passions, that is the things that I hold dear and important, the things that I want or want to do, when my passions are at war within me, and then in that unrest that is settling inside of me as I try to struggle and understand all of these things, and I become discontented with my life and discontented with my circumstances and discontented with the people around me and where I'm at and what I'm doing and whatever else about life that I'm discontented with. When I act on that and it starts affecting my behavior, it necessarily affects my relationships with other people. There is no way around that. And so I can't go through this life doing what I want to do, reacting to my own struggles and my own passions at war within me, lashing out at people, arguing with people, causing strife and dissension with people, and think that all of my relationships are going to be just fine and stay in place. It doesn't work that way. When I act this way and when I allow my passions and my own internal problems to become the catalyst of my behavior and my speech, when I allow myself to be ruled by my passions rather than reigning over my passions, my relationships will be affected. The quarrels, the fights, the schisms, the dissatisfaction with others is often a symptom of my own inner struggles, of my own problems with my own emotions and my struggles with my own desires I don't understand them. I don't understand what I should do about them. I don't discipline them well. Whatever the case is, that's where much of it resides. So he says, if you want to know what causes the quarrels and the fights among you, just look to yourself. Examine your own heart. Examine what's going on inside of you. Recognize that it's your passions welling up within you, and you are allowing your passions to drive you instead of following me. And we'll see that played out by the time we get through here. Then he says, you desire and do not have, so you murder. Now, granted, not everyone who desires and doesn't get murders. Again, that's not the point. That's the extreme end of it. That's where it leads. That's where it goes. The outward behavior is often disproportionate and are inappropriate for the discontent. And so here's the thing. You desire, there's your passion, you desire, and you do not have, so you murder. Now, why is it that an unfulfilled desire within me should cause me to lash out at someone else? Why should my discontent cause me to hate someone else? Why should my failure to attain the things that I want cause me to quarrel with someone else? And that's the way we tend to behave. This disproportion, I don't have, so I'm willing to kill over it. My covetousness, and that's what we're talking about here, is covetousness. The inordinate desire to come into possession of something that you don't have. We generally associate covetousness with things, with money, with power. But listen, covetousness can affect all areas of your life. You can covet someone's wife. You can covet someone's job. You can covet someone's house. You can wish you had their life. You could covet their looks. You can covet their popularity. You can covet their skills and ability. There's lots of things that we can covet. Idolatry essentially arises from covetousness. My covetousness in no way should lead me to taking anything from anyone, much less taking their life. Yet even with King David, we might recall that coveting his neighbor's wife eventually led to his ordering the murder of his neighbor. That's where it all started. You desire and do not have, so you murder. That's exactly what David did. If it can happen to a man after God's own heart, it can happen to anyone. Remember Lamech, way back in Genesis chapter 4? Lamech said, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's revenge is 77-fold. You'll remember that Cain's revenge is sevenfold thing was when God disciplined Cain for his sin. And Cain said, this is too great, and I'm going to be sent out into the world alone, and someone's going to fall upon me. And God said, if anyone harms you, I'll avenge you sevenfold. And Lamech comes along behind him and says, well, if Cain's avenged sevenfold, then I'm going to avenge myself 77-fold. You know what the next guy's going to say? Well, if he's avenged 77-fold, then I'm going to avenge myself 7,000-fold. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse because I'm always the most important. That's why my unfulfilled desire, I believe or justify in my own mind, is worthy of my lashing out against you, of my taking from you. He made that statement. Lamech's revenge is 77-fold as an explanation for actions that he had actually taken. In Genesis chapter 4 and verse 23, he says this, I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. Why am I justified in responding that way, in reacting disproportionately to the circumstances? Why? Because I believe I deserve to be avenged 77 times. You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Do you see how the fighting and quarreling gets pulled right back into the discussion? That's where it started, right? Why are there fights and quarrels among you? And then he talks for a little bit about murder, and you think he's drifting away from that fighting and quarreling stuff and getting to the real serious stuff. And he says, no, I'm talking about the same thing. Why are there fights and quarrels among you? You covet and cannot attain, so you fight and quarrel. Unrestrained desires are the cause of much of the quarreling, the strife, and eventually the hatred that exists in this world. Nations covet the wealth and power and influence of other nations, and that leads to hatred among people and death and war and destruction. Neighbors, brothers, husbands and wives. It's the same old story over and over again. The wrapping may be a little bit different, the scale may be different, but at its core, it's exactly the same thing. It is someone that wants something that they cannot obtain or they have not obtained, and they see it and they take it out on someone else. It's inappropriate responses to unattainable desires. That's what it all is. Ultimately, that's what all sin is. Inappropriate responses to unattainable desires. Not getting what we want, what our passions dictate are right, and so we inappropriately respond to it. That goes all the way back to Cain's story as well. You remember that, right? When Cain's brother offered up a sacrifice that God was pleased with, but God was not pleased with his sacrifice. And he got mad. And God says, well, why are you angry? Just do what is right. And instead, he killed his brother. He wanted God's approval. He couldn't obtain God's approval the way that his passions dictated that he should gain God's approval. And so the one who did gain God's approval, his brother, he hated and he killed. How many other circumstances are like that? How many murders have occurred because if I can't have you, no one will have you. Or if I can't have that house or that money, neither can you. I watched a documentary just yesterday about a case in Ohio where two young people, one of which actually worked for this couple. This couple owned a small business in a small town in Ohio, had a little bit of this world's goods as a result of hard work, and actually out of their concern and charity for people in the community, they'd given this young man some work on several occasions to help him out. It wasn't that they really needed him to be employed by them. They were trying to help him. And he sat there with his girlfriend, maybe his wife, they may have been married, I don't know. They had different last names, that's all I can tell you. And stewed about the situation, and he had been in their home before to work for them. And he had heard that they kept a considerable amount of cash on hand. And he wanted that money. And he knew that he couldn't break into the house and take it when they were not at home because they had a security system and he didn't have the code for the security system. So he could only go to get the money when they were home. And when he was interviewed by the police, what he said was, well, I don't really know how it happened, how it got that far. I'll tell you how it got that far. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. He went in that house. He took their own knife from their own kitchen. The man walked to his safe, opened the safe, handed the guy the money, and then the guy stabbed him to death. Then he went to the bedroom with the man's wife, demanding the jewelry. She opens the safe in the bedroom, lets them have whatever they want, and then he stabbed her to death. What is the source? You desire and do not have, so you murder. Whatever it takes for me to fulfill my desire at your cost. Unrestrained desires. Inappropriate responses. Fights, quarrels, hatred, war, they often arise out of one's own feelings of dissatisfaction and unfairness. There's a war being fought this very day for exactly this reason. We want that land. And we don't think you deserve to have it. A lot of trouble, a lot of heartache, a lot of broken relationships, and other sin can be controlled by implementing this. Hebrews 13:5, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. If we will just be content knowing that God is there and we have a relationship with him and he will always be there, no matter what the world looks like, no matter what we have or don't have for the short time that we're here on the earth, if we would just learn to be content and to not covet and desire those things that we do not have, a lot of problems will be taken care of. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Why? Because God said, I will never leave you. And that ought to be enough. James goes on by inspiration, you do not have because you do not ask. It's not a matter of us not having a legitimate way to obtain things. Like any good father, God has an open ear, and he's willing to provide the things that we need. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You see, the passions, they come right back into the story again. I'm not needing something because it's necessary or because it's right or because I'm going to help someone with it or because, no. It's to fulfill my passion. God is not going to feed my covetousness. So if the only reason I am seeking something is because I have improper desire to possess, I shouldn't expect anything to be given to me. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your own passion. What we need to learn is there's no need to lash out at anyone. not at ourselves. And listen, a lot of people lash out at themselves. They are not what they think they ought to be, or what they think they want to be, or what they would like for others to see them as, or whatever it is. And so they lash out at themselves. They harm themselves. There are people that cut themselves, that mutilate themselves, that kill themselves. It's no different. It's the same thing. It's not directed at someone else, but it's directed at me. But it's the same problem. There's no need to lash out at ourselves, at others, or at God, for that matter. There's a lot of that goes on. People that curse God, lash out at God. You'll recall when Job lost everything, and in that short period of time, his wealth was stolen from him, his flocks were gone, his houses were collapsed under the whirlwind, his health was taken from him. He was sitting there sick and alone, and his wife said what? Curse God and die. Lash out at God. And Job's response is, no, I came into this world with nothing. I'm going to leave it with nothing. Why should I lash out at God? Because I don't have something. No reason to lash out at ourselves, at others, or at God over discontent, over undisciplined passions. And that's what we're talking about here. People's passions that are not disciplined and controlled. And over ignorance, because there's a lot of it that happens over ignorance as well. The reason why I have these uncontrolled, undisciplined passions is because I don't understand. I don't understand what life is about. I don't understand my desires. I don't understand what's supposed to be going on. I don't understand how to respond. And then the turmoil ensues. And we destroy our own lives and the lives of everyone else around us that we touch. God is not going to supply our every whim, but He will, like the loving Father that He is, give us what we need when we ask honestly and in good faith. When we go before Him and make a legitimate request with a righteous heart, He said, listen to Matthew 7, 8 through 11. Everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. The one who knocks it will be opened. Which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who's in heaven give good things to those who ask Him? God's willing and able to give us the things that we properly ask for. If you can do it for your children, then certainly God can do it for His creation. There's no need to do the things that we do in this world. And so He says, you adulterous people. Now, wait a minute, I thought adultery was when I'm unfaithful to my spouse. Yeah, that's what it is. And metaphorically, that's what we're doing. When we have these uncontrolled, unbridled passions and we allow it to cause us to behave in such terrible, faithless ways. Whatever they manifest themselves as. These are the reasons why we fight and quarrel and we murder, but these are also reasons why we abuse drugs and alcohol. These are the reasons why we cheat and why we steal. These are the reasons why we do all sorts of evil things. You adulterous people. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. The kind of living that we're talking about, this undisciplined thought and behavior, This giving in to the passions of ourselves and our own desires and going out and seeking to gain what we want, how we want, anytime we want, any way we want. That living makes us unfaithful to God and creates animus between us and God. Strife. It's not God's fault, it's my fault. Why is there strife between me and God? Because I, not because He. And you hear it all the time from people. Why does God? No. The question is, why do I? It's my behavior and my decisions and the things that I say that creates the animosity between me and God. I think it possible, and I want to make it clear, I'm not setting this forth as doctrine or saying that this is the absolute explanation, but I think it possible that God allows His divorce exception. You know that teaching in Matthew 9:19 when they came to Him about that, and He says, well, if your spouse is guilty of sexual immorality, that is, your spouse is an adulterer, in that case, yes, you can put them away. I think that it's possible that exception exists for the cause of sexual immorality to help us grasp the immense grief and sorrow that our ungodly behavior causes Him. You adulteresses. So that we can grasp not only the pain and the grief and the sorrow, but the division that such sin places between us and God. Did you notice the language here? You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? It creates division, separation, animosity. Just like a cheating spouse creates strife within the relationship. I think it's probably the only way we're ever going to really grasp what our unrestrained behavior does to God and does to our relationship with God. And I think, well, I'm certain of this, the reason why He uses the phrase, you adulterous people, is to get us to think in those terms. We cannot live to the flesh and to our worldly passions and at the same time sustain a healthy relationship with God. It's just not possible. Listen to Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. It's not possible. And yet, that is the rule of the world. It takes someone who works very, very hard to discipline themselves in the righteousness of God and to rein themselves under control and to discipline and control their passions and desires and to channel the love that we talked about this morning into our lives and to act and respond out of love rather than out of a response to our covetous, unrestrained passions and desires. It's a serious, serious problem. I'm not sure that it's a simple solution. Beyond this, drink deeply from the word and the instruction of God. Pray earnestly for His strength and His direction. And work hard to do what the Apostle Paul talked about when he said that he was crucified with Christ, and that it was no longer him that lived, but Christ that lived in him. He was saying, I have worked and disciplined. In fact, he talked about that in terms in another place, that he had buffeted his body, as the King James Version puts it. He had disciplined himself, made himself a slave. He worked hard to rein in his passions and his desires, and instead allowing God to work through him and to direct his steps. And so eventually he could say of himself and of all faithful Christians, for we walk by faith and not by sight. Lesson's yours this evening. Think about these things, and if there's something that you need to change in your life, if you're struggling with some of these things, understand you're not alone. The whole world is struggling. But there is hope. Christ came into the world and died so that you could have hope. God revealed his word so that you can have hope, so that you can be disciplined, so that you can learn, so that you can come to understand, so that you can manage these passions and desires that are running amok in your life and causing so much carnage. By the way, sometimes you don't even realize that the carnage is being caused. But boy, when it presents itself, you see how serious it is. And then it's too late. The damage is done. Don't wait for that. Try to rein in the passions. Try to control yourself. Try to let God lead you, because he's leading you in the right way. I know it's hard, and I know it's difficult, and I know sometimes it doesn't even seem like it's the right way. My GPS is like that. Sometimes it tells me to turn left, and I'm convinced I need to turn right. But it's always right. And when I go against the urging and go the wrong way, I get led down a path that doesn't bring me where I want to go. It's the same with God. When I'm not willing to follow his instructions and do what he says because I think I have a better way, it will always end in destruction. His will always lead us to life. We can help you in regard to these things. Let it be known as we stand and sing.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory.